Living Dead Audio proudly presents Mall of the Dead by Jesse Pfister. My name is Zachariah Trafford, and I'm a murderer. I have murdered a countless number of people. As I lay in this room covered in filth and with the sound of roaring engines ending my existence, trapped and bound by my fate, I am quickly writing down all that transpired so you can read and know my story. If this note survives the carnage, know that all is well. I have made peace with God, but the cost was my early demise and death. I had just finished work for the day at Hamilton Community College. I'm an English professor at a downtown campus in St. Louis, Missouri. I was going to head home, throw a pizza in the oven, and go to bed early before I had to be up all over again by 5 a.m. Every day was a repeat of the last. This day, I wanted to be different. Instead of the usual route on 270 with the endless stream of brake lights of commuter traffic, I took a turn on some back roads and found myself on Halcyon Drive. I gave a faint chuckle when I saw the dilapidated sign for Johnson's Mall. The sign was badly weathered, and the letters were now faded. This was the mall from my childhood. My now-deceased Grandma Trafford took me to the food court for nuggets and fries, and would slowly watch me rifle through the cassette tape section of Walden Books. She would patiently watch me pick my favorites. She'd buy any tape I wanted. The memory seemed so long ago, I could have been convinced it was all a dream. I spent my teenage years strolling up and down the halls of this place to buy overly expensive clothes I didn't have money to buy. I was consumed with image and the zeitgeist of the times. Plus, I had girls I was trying to impress, and one girl, Hallie Summers in particular. I took Hallie to the food court for our first date when I was 16, and then to the adjacent Warenberg Theater for a movie. That night she had her hair in a long blonde ponytail and wore a yellow summer dress with white polka dots that made my face the color of a strawberry when she walked around the corner to meet me. She was the prettiest girl in high school, and everyone knew it. For that matter, she was the prettiest girl I had ever seen up to that point in my life. After dinner, we went to the theater. I don't recall the movie we watched, but I do remember holding her hand for the first time. I started to reach for her by just barely touching her finger about halfway through the film, and by the end, our hands were locked tight. We shared our first kiss after the movie ended as we sat in my small Honda car. And for 2 years, Hallie Summers and I spent nearly every waking moment together. Until we didn't. We drifted apart for some reason. Why had we stopped dating? I tried to recall the reason as I slipped into the vacant parking lot with torn-up signs declaring, "No trespassing, violators will be prosecuted." I parked in a pothole-littered space and stared at busted-out windows with green ivory popping out like long tentacles, making their way down walls of faded white bricks that needed a good power wash job. A power wash job that would never come. As I sat parked, I noticed a dull pain formed in my head. The beginning of a headache, probably because I had forgotten to eat my lunch and I couldn't recall the last time I drank any water. I ran my tongue across dry lips. My throat felt like I had swallowed sand. The fate of this mall, along with thousands of others across the country, was doomed to demolition. The internet had made it possible to buy everything from the comfort of your abode, and the need to come out in a public space such as this was superfluous. At first, the convenience seemed like a great trade-off, and perhaps it was. But humanity lost something as a result. I think it lost the ability to connect, to see people out of their normal habitation and come together. Years ago, I had watched several of those dead mall videos where someone got inside to film the remnants and remains of the corpse of the building. There was even a video of this mall, and waves of nostalgia tossed my mind to and fro as I saw the stores of my formative years in complete disarray. All those years are now gone. All that time spent here is over. Most of my high school friends grew up and moved away. A few remained local, but other than social media, I don't see them often. I see my fellow teachers at the community college, but no one I've really got to know in the 12 years or so I've been there. That seems to be the curse of the social media generation. We're too busy with our phones and streaming services to care about real relationships. For years, I longed to be a breakout writer, adored and hailed as someone of significance, but those dreams died after about my 1,000th attempt to find a publisher who would print the kinds of stories I thought the public would want. Publishing houses didn't agree, and I had to keep my job as an English teacher with students who didn't know the difference between Orwell and Shakespeare. The mall represented a different era. For me and for the people who inhabited its long hallways and stores. And it wasn't coming back. It was dead. Like those high school friendships. Like Grandma. Like my relationship with Holly. I thought about pulling up the Dead Mall video to watch the walkthrough of this familiar haunt. I reached for my phone in my pocket, but something drew my hand back. I looked around the parking lot. I didn't see any security trucks. No mall police were driving about. Not one car in the massive lot. The lot was mostly hidden by shrubs and trees that had grown up in the years since the mall's closing. My next move might be crazy, but instead of watching the video, why not see if there was a loose door or busted window and just take a peek inside? The video was great, but I was here, and this could be my last chance to see the phantom of adolescent memories that would soon crumble away with this gigantic rubble. I could see for myself what had become of this colossal wreck. I now wish I had not left my car. I wish to God I had not gotten inside this place. I scanned the parking lot one more time and was sure no one was nearby as I slid out of my Corolla and moved quickly to the front entrance. Big solid boards were obstructing the once completely glass doorway, but a few windows were near the ground. I could peek inside. I threw my hand on the glass and pressed my nose to the window. Someone had decided to tape the inside of the windows. "Come on," I mumbled. I peered to my right and could see the sign for the Warenberg Theater. That sign was even in worse shape than the mall's entrance sign. I knew there were some windows over there, so I decided to walk the 50 yards or so and check it out. The air outside was progressively getting colder for October. It was late October, and the days were warm in the sun and cold by its setting. I was going to try one last window, and if I couldn't see anything, I was going to head to my car and drive home. I could watch the Dead Mall video from the comfort of my bedroom. By the time I got there, I discovered a boarded-up entrance and windows that were spray-painted from inside, obstructing my vision again. "Guess I won't be seeing you," I said as I stared up at the monstrous theater sign missing a few of the letters. I looked back down and was going to turn to go, but something caught my eye. Next to the front entrance to the theater was a long corridor. Down the corridor was a door that looked slightly ajar. Growing up, I had walked near this theater entrance countless times. I don't ever remember seeing this. I decided to walk towards the door, and when I got there, sure enough, it was slightly open. My eyes shot in all directions. I wanted to make sure no one was around. Of course, no one was there. I took a step through the door and into the blackened mall. The first thing I noticed right away was the way the air smelled. It was malodorous. The smell when you go inside an old attic that houses 100-year-old furniture. I couldn't see in front of me, so I held out both hands. I cautiously placed one foot in front of the other. After several steps, I turned around. The sliver of light shone from the doorway that I left cracked open. As I looked at the door, I could hear a great burst of wind coming from outside, and the door shut itself. A tremor of fear shot up my spine, and I moved back to the door. By the time I reached it, I realized how silly I'd been for not using my phone's light. I quickly snatched the phone and turned on the light. I jiggled the door, but it wouldn't budge. The handle wouldn't move at all. "That's weird," I said, and my voice echoed in darkness. I spun around with my light. There's gotta be another door out of here. I could now see I was in an empty room. There was no furniture, no tables, No stray pieces of paper left about on the floor. In fact, the carpet of the place looked to be in great shape. No detectable dirt or trash. The room must have been some kind of storage facility that they never used, I thought. I shone my light on the walls. The walls had red carpet on them from floor to ceiling. There was nothing on them except one picture. Moving towards it, I recognized the picture. It was a poster. I had the same poster in my bedroom when I was about 5 years old. It was a movie poster from Alice in Wonderland, a still image of the moment Alice is falling down the rabbit hole. My movie poster was unique, though. My mom had caught me writing my name in green crayon on the bottom. I remember not being able to finish my last name, and this one, I nearly dropped my phone. It couldn't be. This one had green crayon on the bottom. Zachariah Trafford. No, I said. It couldn't be. My eyes truly didn't believe the visage. It was impossible for this to be here. I recalled removing and throwing the poster away years later when I thought I was too old for fairy tales. This is impossible, I stated in the darkness. I drew away from the poster, shaking my head in disbelief. I needed to get out of the mall and get back to my car. Near the Alice poster was a door. This one was unlocked, and I threw it open. I stepped inside and found myself in one of the theater rooms. I stood in front of an enormous screen that was never going to turn back on. I hadn't been to any theater in several years, probably since streaming services began. I had forgotten how big the screens were. I turned and looked toward the empty chairs. Everything was clean, which I thought was odd. No leftover cups or popcorn bags littered the floor. Most rooms in abandoned malls get completely trashed by hobos and looters. This theater room was completely unspoiled. It was as if the theater manager could just turn everything back on in a moment's notice and the silver screen could come to life again. Memory of Hallie suddenly came to the fore of my mind. Was it in this room we had our first date? I couldn't help it, but I gave a weak smile at the thought. The sound of Hallie's soft voice, a voice I hadn't heard in years, echoed down the web of my brain. I noticed the dull sensation in my head had crescendoed into throbs of painful waves. "I like your hand," Hallie had said as I gripped her small fingers around mine. I remember smiling and instinctively kissing her forehead. She gave a surprised grin and rested her head on my shoulder until the end of the movie. I moved toward the exit doors. For some impulsive reason, I looked down on the floor where the soft tread lights would have guided me if they were on. They weren't on, of course. I pushed through the double doors and knew I was in a long hallway that would lead to the entrance of the theater. I had come out of theater room 6. The smell of the place was still putrid, and the air was thick with mildew. Definitely not helping my headache. In spite of the added smell of an abandoned building, there was a remnant of what the place used to smell like. I breathed it in. It was the faint smell of popcorn. Even the greenish carpet gave off an odor I could now remember when they first installed this theater and the place was brand new. The smell of my teenage years still lingered and hung about in the air. A smell of memory mixed with the abandoned dead mall's rank. I finally made it to the concession stand and was shocked to find the place wasn't busted up. This was very peculiar to me because I recalled in the video seeing the glass windows that once stored overpriced candy busted and the soda fountain area smashed. The place looked cleaned up. It was untouched, completely put back together. Who would clean up the mess? I said aloud. Perhaps I was mistaken and it was a different mall video? I did binge watch several videos from dead malls all over the country, but I knew I wasn't misremembering. This whole area had been viciously destroyed, and someone put it back together again? Why? My feet made small echoes on the tiled floor. I finally came to the large kiosk that I knew had been wrecked. There was no way someone would take the time to clean up that much damage. But sure enough, it was in pristine condition. Huh? I asked. How in the world? My thoughts on why the place was cleaned up came to a sudden halt. To my surprise, standing in the center of the kiosk was a mannequin. He was shirtless but had on swim trunks. The very swim trunks I bought from American Eagle, maybe 20 years ago? What kind of joke was this? Some insane prank? First the Alice poster. Now someone dressed a mannequin with my old swim trunks? How could this be happening? I had decided to come to the mall instead of driving straight home. I had decided to go through the door. A bad idea I could now see. No one lured me here or encouraged me to stop in this place. I was here on my own. I shook my head and approached the theater exit doors that would take me into the mall. As I neared the door, I suddenly heard a sound. Was it rumbling? There was some reverberation on the door when I touched it. I pressed my ear to the door and could faintly hear what sounded like music playing. I immediately recognized the tune, Forever Young by Alphaville. How was music coming from the mall speakers? The power in the place had to have been turned off years ago. I hadn't seen a single light on since entering. I gently pulled the theater door open and received the shock of my life. The mall lights were on. The floors were clean. They were spotless. I could smell the scent of bleach. Nothing was wrecked or out of place. Had a developer purchased the mall and was planning a reopening? That couldn't be. This place looked like a bomb went off on the outside, and the latest I had read stated this mall was going to be demolished by the end of October. I had just read that yesterday. I couldn't detect any sign that this place had been vacant for any time, let alone was a dead mall. What is going on? I asked, shaking my head. There were no boards covering the exit doors to leave the mall like I had seen from the outside of the building. The exit sign above was glowing red. I looked up toward the ceiling with enormous glass windows. No glass shattered up there. No gross mildew could be detected around the windows. I frowned. I realized I didn't need my phone's light on anymore, so I turned it off. Right away, I noticed my phone had no service. I tapped the screen and tried to get online. It wouldn't work. The network said, not available. That made sense because I was in an enormous building that could disrupt frequency, and surely this place didn't have Wi-Fi. I had been staring at my phone when I noticed sounds of movement behind me. Tap, squeak, tap, squeak. I must admit, it did not alarm me at first because the music and cleanliness of the building made me feel comfortable, like I was in a building that should be full with people. But it registered to me where I truly was, and that the sound of another's footsteps would be out of place, and would most likely be either a homeless vagabond or a security guard who would assuredly be upset if I was here. Either way, my heart began to beat wildly in my chest. I heard the sounds again. Tap, squeak, tap, squeak. I spun around to see who or what was coming. But when I did, I only saw an empty mall in front of me. Hello? I called. Anyone there? The last thing I wanted was an answer. Perhaps it had just been my imagination playing tricks on me. I cautiously moved toward where the sounds had come from, one small step after another, glancing this way and that. No one was in view. I breathed heavily. I need to get out of here, I said. As I turned to go, the sound of soft squeaking that lightly patted the floor was almost in direct unison with my steps. I quickly turned around. For a brief moment, I noticed a figure move and then retreat behind one of the big water fountains. "Who is there?" I yelled, my voice echoing off the floor and walls. I waited for the figure to reveal itself. It did not. With haste, I moved to the fountain and called again. "Hello? Who is here?" Finally, I reached the fountain, and standing behind it was an old man. His white hair was a bit disheveled, and he had a big mustache. He wore a custodian outfit. "What are you doing here?" I asked with a confused look. I, he stuttered. "I was just finishing work for the day. About to head for home," he said. "Where do you work?" I asked as he took a step away from me. "Right here," he said, looking confused now. "For the mall?" I asked. You work for the mall? That's right, he said, and gave a smile revealing some stained teeth. Been employed here for 36 years. Sir, I said. He pointed to his chest with an italicized name sewn on. Name's Mike. Okay, Mike, I said. The mall has been closed down for quite a while. How do you work here? Mike's eyebrows furrowed. Excuse me? He asked. What do you mean, closed? Place has slowed down a bit in the last few years, but it ain't closed. Now I was thoroughly confused. They are tearing this place down in a couple of days, I said. It's been vacant for years now. I used to come here when I was younger. I remember the day it got shut down. Mike looked stunned. His eyes darted behind me. His eyes then formed into a squint. You seem like a nice guy, he said, but you don't know what you're talking about. I could have argued with him further, but he appeared entirely convinced that this place was still very much in operation. And to be honest, the condition of the inside of the mall was making me question if it was really scheduled to come down. Perhaps Mike was right. Okay, I said. Well, I was just leaving myself. At that moment, he unexpectedly lunged toward me. I was so startled I couldn't react. He held my wrist and said softly, You need to see. His eyes were wide, and his grip got tighter and tighter. Need to see what? I asked, whispering. Mike glanced all around him again. He finally let go of my wrist. You need to see the new fountain. They just installed it. His voice was still quiet, and his breath smelled foul. It smelled like the room with the Alice poster, the smell of rotted wood. Why? I asked. Why do I need to see some fountain? Mike backed away and waited a moment before answering. He grinned and said, Because it's pretty. Everyone who comes in here sees the fountain. I actually chuckled and acquiesced. Okay, I'll check out the new fountain. Where is it? Mike made a grin, and I could see all the stains in the back of his mouth. It's that way. Mike pointed behind him. Go past the food court and down a ways. It's standing directly in front of the penny store. J.C. Penney's? I asked. Yep, he said. Mike, J.C. Penney's went out of business years ago. Mike stiffened. He lost his smile and got serious. His voice found a deep register, and he said matter-of-factly, Not here it didn't. I raised an eyebrow. If my memory was correct, and JCPenney's was here, it was on the opposite side of the mall I was standing at that moment. Probably a 15-minute nonstop walk. Can't I go see it another time? I asked. There is no other time. He paused and said, Like the present. And with that, he made for the exit door. I watched him go. He slipped out the door as I stood there vacillating between walking out the doors myself or checking out the fountain some mall janitor wanted me to see for some reason. I should have left. I should have ran out the doors and climbed into my car and headed home. Perhaps I would have lived. Maybe I could have avoided all the pain and torture that would shortly follow. I made my way past storefront after storefront that showed no sign this mall had ever been abandoned and destroyed. The place looked like it was ready for business. I marveled at stores I hadn't seen in years. I passed the Walden Books where Grandma bought me those cassettes. GNC where I had spent a small fortune on protein supplements that didn't ever give me the desired physique I wanted. I came around a corner and caught a whiff of burgers and fries. I was nearing the food court where so much of my teenage life was spent hanging with high school buddies. And of course, Hallie Summers. The moment I saw the Chick-fil-A sign, my eyes went to the very table. At least I think it was the same table Hallie and I had our first date. I suddenly could recall some of our conversation. It was about our favorite books we were reading. It seemed odd, but cool that she was the prettiest girl in high school and read Dickens and Dostoevsky. Kind of unreal. I was mesmerized by her soft cheeks, and the way she threw her blonde hair back when she giggled at my utter disdain for Henry David Thoreau. "You wouldn't want to go off and live in the woods like he did? Get away from society?" Hallie had asked. "Who would want that?" I asked. "He was utterly wrong. Some people would like a solitary environment, and his writing is beautiful," Hallie said with a perfect smile. Her lips could nearly convince me. I wanted to lunge across the table that very instant and kiss her mouth, but I restrained myself and waited, at least for a few hours. I hadn't thought about that conversation in years. Somehow seeing this place and that table brought it all back. My headache was also picking up. I hadn't realized it, but as I was remembering that scene, I was rubbing my temples profusely. I shut my eyes. "What is wrong with my head?" I said aloud. It was probably the worst headache I had ever experienced, and I had some splitting migraines before. I still hadn't seen anyone since Mike the janitor, so I didn't know who was making the food. The only sound was ambient mall music and my footsteps as I trudged on to the fountain. My head was pounding so bad I nearly turned around and left. But that's when I heard the sound that sent a chill down my back, and I came to an abrupt halt. It started as a soft whine. It was just loud enough to be heard over the music. It sounded animal-like. Wah! 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 My first thought was that a rabbit or a cat was trapped somewhere nearby, but the whine intensified into an outright scream. Then several screeches and moans, and finally, an unsettling silence. I stood. My mouth hung open. I looked this way and that. Nothing seemed out of place. I waited for what felt like minutes, and up ahead I could see the big white JCPenney letters, and right below was an enormous fountain. The fountain did not appear to be any different than the other series of fountains I had already passed, just a weird geometric shape that resembled the lowercase letter T. I shook my head. "Guess that old janitor lied," I said. "There's nothing special about this thing." I nearly turned to go when slowly from the top of the fountain, liquid began to protrude and cascade down. Only it wasn't water. It was red. Very red. "Okay, Mike, nice. This isn't that..." But I had to stop talking. It wasn't some red liquid. It was thick. And it began spurting and squirting and came running over, filling the entire pool beneath the fountain. It was at that moment I realized what the liquid was. It was blood. There was no mistake. Gallons and gallons of blood sprayed from the top of the fountain. I nearly fell to the floor at the sight of literal blood pouring down. I found myself backing away slowly, unable to look away. Finally, I had enough. I turned and ran. My head was pounding so hard I thought it would explode. As I came to the food court, I was shocked to see the back of a figure sitting at one of the tables. It happened to be the table where Hallie and I had our first date. "Hey!" I shouted. "Hey! There's blood back there! It's coming from a fountain!" The figure didn't move. I could now see it was a woman. She had long hair. She wore a yellow dress. She slowly turned as I neared the table, and it was at that moment that a shock so rattled me, I nearly forgot about the blood-red fountain. The face was older than the last time I had seen it in the spring of youth, when her eyes possessed a vibrancy that resembled diamonds, and her cheeks had the vitality of young age. There was no smile on her cracked lips. Her hands were placed on the table, and I could see blue veins that indicated the marks of time had their way with them. But in spite of all the years that had eclipsed, there was no mistaking who this woman was. "Hal," I began, hardly able to speak, my heart beating in rapid succession. "Hallie, what are you doing here?" She looked at me with those eyes that had first enraptured me as a young man. Those soft blue orbs now possessed etchings and lines around them. In spite of her demure countenance, she was still beautiful. "Zachariah," she said. Her lips wouldn't break into her familiar smile. "You know why I'm here, and you know why you're here." I tried to process her words, but I couldn't. "I have no idea why any of this is happening," I said defensively. But as I said this, a wave of pain from the headache I had been suffering made me so weak I crumbled to the floor. I reached for my head with my hands and squeezed, pressing my temples so hard I thought I could have busted my head open. After several seconds, I peered up from the floor. Hallie was sitting there with that same expressionless stare. At that moment, I thought surely all of this must be a dream, a stray, empty nightmare that I would wake from any moment. This couldn't be real. Hallie couldn't be in this dead mall. This place couldn't be kept up by some eccentric janitor. The fountain was a figment of my imagination. None of this was happening. "Hallie," I said, "please tell me, what is going on? What happened to us all those years ago? Where?" The pain in my head surged, and I thought this wasn't a headache. This is a brain aneurysm. I was going to die on the mall floor in front of my old girlfriend at the very place we had our first date. Finally, Hallie stood up. As she did, the lights went off. The music ceased. There was a complete silence. She slowly approached me. She bent down. I could smell her breath. It was the scent of when I first entered the building, the smell of Mike's breath, that strange, putrid, rotten odor. She reached out her hand and placed it on my shoulder. She then rubbed her fingers gently on my head. She still possessed her soft touch. "Remember, Zachariah," Hallie whispered. "Remember what happened to us." Somehow, the headache completely dissipated. It was instant, just gone. I quickly stood and grabbed her hands. I looked into her eyes. They were still blue stars. "Hallie, I don't..." As I looked at her hardened face, suddenly I could recall everything that had happened between us. These memories had been blocked somehow, but now they were unleashed like floodwaters bursting over a dam. Years ago, a change had begun in me. A secret change. One that I had never told Hallie about and was the genesis of our wrecked relationship. The change started with those 1,000 digital women that I perused and became so addicted to watching. Massive amounts of voyeurism never left me with the satisfaction of true intimacy. A feast for the eyes had left a barren soul inside me, and I longed for more with Hallie. I had begged her for the real thing. She resisted at first. She wanted us to wait until marriage, but I wore her down and got my way. Our lovemaking was rare at first, but once the door was open, it became easier and easier for us to steal away in my car or a bedroom. And finally, she came to me one day with the news. "I'm pregnant," she had said with a frightened look in her eyes. "I don't know what to do." We had just turned 18. My mind was still a black fog of lust, and I told her flippantly, "Just get rid of it." Her pained face was aghast with dread. I don't want to. It's our baby, and..." "Hal," I said, "we're too young. We have time to have more, but not now. We need to go to college, and..." Hallie burst into tears. I placed my hand on her shoulder. Then I rubbed the top of her head. We sat for hours going back and forth about what to do. It ended in a fight and with her storming out of my bedroom, confused about how to proceed. She didn't talk to me for several days. Then a few weeks went by, and I got a call from her on my way into work one day. "It's done," she stated with no emotion in her voice. I breathed a sigh of relief. "I'm sorry," I said. "It's for the best, Hal." She then broke down crying. I remember the sound of her weeping. Several minutes later, she said she needed to go. We saw each other once more. She didn't wear any makeup. She had red bags under her eyes. She held my hand and said I had changed so much since we had first met. She wanted space. I watched her drive off. She drove off and, as this memory engulfed my mind, I stared at the older Hallie who stood before me. This was impossible. She really couldn't be here. "Hallie," I whispered. "This can't be happening. I saw you drive off that day. You died in a car crash. Oh my God, you died!" Hallie's lips never moved to answer. Her blue eyes blinked once and then turned into black ovals. "I'm sorry!" I shouted. "I was wrong! I was wrong!" Hallie's hands fell to their sides. Slowly, her form changed. Her cheeks collapsed inside her face. Her hair fell to the floor. Her lips melted, leaving only teeth. She was a skeleton in a dress. In terror, I screamed, "No!" I watched what remained of Hallie's form topple to the floor. I ran and then tripped several times. As I moved, I could hear that scream from earlier. It was louder now. It seemed to come from all directions, down every hallway and store. It wasn't an injured animal. It was the sound of an infant, a tortured baby in bondage. Up ahead, I saw the red exit signs and felt a momentary sense of relief. I would be out of this mall of horrors in a moment. Perhaps sanity would return, or perhaps I would awake to find this had just been an awful dream. Sprinting to the door, I suddenly stopped. Mike stood there, his arms across his chest. He had a black bag that was strapped across his back. He shook his head. "So," he said, "you check out that fountain?" "I'm leaving," I yelled. "I'm getting out of here." "Oh, go ahead," he said with a wry smile. I pushed the glass doors. They wouldn't budge. I pushed again. I tried with all the strength I had, but they wouldn't open. "Mike," I said, out of breath. "Please, let me out." Mike grimaced and stated, "No, I don't think so." "Why?" I asked. "I don't belong here." Mike shook his head. "It was your blood, you know." "What?" I asked quickly. "What was my blood? The fountain?" "Oh, yes," Mike said. "All your future blood. All the generations that were going to come from you. Thousands of generations cut off. You ripped them apart." "No!" I shouted. "You don't know what you're talking about." The crying of the infant had not ceased. It was loud, coming from behind me, echoing off the ceiling, reverberating off the walls. "Care to see what I've got here?" Mike asked as he slung his bag around. I hesitated and backed away. "No," I said firmly. "I don't want to see anything. I want to leave." Mike ignored me, and he unzipped the bag and said, "It's truly something special." "I don't want to see anything, you crazy janitor!" I yelled. Mike slowly looked up at me with a diabolical grin. "I'm not the janitor, Zachariah," he said, reaching his hand into the bag. "I was Hallie's doctor." He slowly and with care pulled out a small, bloodied body. It was screaming. From my mouth protruded a guttural cry. My eyes filled with tears. I ran. I slipped on something wet and collapsed. It was a puddle, and it was sticky. Blood. There was blood running red on the marbled floor. I stood. My hands and arms now had blood running down them. I could barely see through the salt of my own tears. Reaching the theater, I ran through the doors. The theater box was completely wrecked. No mannequins stood in the middle. Glass covered the floor and was strewn about. I moved down the hallway and reached theater room 6. Only now, the door was locked. I tried every room. It was all locked tight. Ugh! I moaned and ran back the way I came. My eyes darted in every direction. I was determined to try all the exit points and windows in this entire mall. As I opened the door that led back into the main part of the mall, the odor and stench that was on Hallie's breath now hung heavy in the air. The mall was completely wrecked and destroyed. Overgrown plants made the mall look like a wicked garden with arms and legs that devoured the floors, working its way onto the ceiling. Tripping and falling in blood as I went, I attempted every exit door for hours. I threw chairs against windows. Nothing broke. Nothing gave way. I was trapped. I had one last opportunity for escape. I stared at the immovable escalators that led to the second floor. I limped up the stairs. I ran first to Sears, only to be halted by the metal fence that I couldn't lift up. Then I came to Macy's and ran through the pitch-black department store. My hands held out in front of me as I went. I believed I was in the shell of the men's department, and along a wall I could feel a door. I turned the knob and set a foot inside. The room was completely dark. I walked with trepidation, and then I fell through a hole in the floor. I don't know how far I fell, but when I landed, everything went black. When I awoke, the first thing I noticed was a throbbing pain in my entire body, but particularly in my legs. I couldn't move them. I didn't know where I was, but as my eyes slowly adjusted, I could faintly see that it appeared I was in an old office room. The room's walls and door were completely white. A white desk sat in the corner. I called for help. I very slowly and with the lower half of my body writhing in pain, inched toward the door. It was locked. I have been here in this room for days now. My phone is dead. The white desk has a drawer full of paper. I have decided to pen these words. This is my story. I, Zachariah Trafford, am guilty of the blood of the innocent. I cannot get out. As I write these words, in the distance, I can hear the sound of moaning engines and an occasional blast every few hours. They have come to bring them all down.